Locked On Broncos, your daily podcast on the Denver Broncos, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Locked On Broncos. This is your host, Cody Roark, and tonight we're just about 45 minutes away from kickoff between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Denver Broncos. So before that, we hope to keep you posted on any pregame notes, injury updates as well. John Gennaro of Locked On Chargers joins me here to talk about his key matchups, as well as I'll give my input on what matchups I believe are going to be key for the Broncos in order to win this game. We're going to cover the injury report, and we're going to talk about which game, obviously between these two teams over the years, has been the most memorable for us. And he gives you some inside intel on what's going on with the Los Angeles Chargers. Obviously, with them moving to Los Angeles, no longer being in San Diego, he joins me here on Locked On Broncos in just a few moments. But before we get to the interview, I want to remind you guys that with the constantly evolving realm of technology that we have, obviously, Amazon Alexa smart speakers have been taking over the world. And now you can obviously listen to Locked On Broncos or any Locked On channel, whether it's Locked On NFL, Locked On Chargers, Chiefs, etc. The Locked On Podcast Network will be brought to you by a lot of different areas, and obviously including Apple Home and obviously Alexa. So if you want to say, hey Alexa, play me Locked On Broncos, it'll pull up the show and it'll be right in your ear, around your system, wherever you're at, wherever you have Amazon Alexa or Apple Home here soon. Smart speakers are taking over the podcast game. And also in the meantime, when you look at all the podcasts that you listen to, which is your top five? If you have a top five lineup, is Locked On Broncos in your top five? When you need Broncos news, intel, and the latest updates with what's going on with the Denver Broncos, where do you go? Hopefully Locked On Broncos is in your top five, and if not, I encourage you to make a list of your top five podcasts and see where Locked On Broncos ranks in there and how we can improve. Head on over to Apple and iTunes right now, leave a review for Locked On Broncos, and stay in the loop for all the latest Broncos news. Be sure to also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Broncos and follow me at Cody Roark NFL. We're going to be doing our contest here soon where a listener of Locked On Broncos can join me for an episode of Locked On Broncos to talk about this week's matchup or the results of last week's matchup. So stay tuned. The announcement's going to go out here in the next day on Twitter at Locked On Broncos. So without further ado, John Gennaro of Locked On Chargers joins me here for an episode of Locked On Broncos where we cover the matchup between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Denver Broncos. We're moments away for kickoff. John, welcome to Locked On Broncos and Locked On Chargers all at once. How you doing?
Doing all right, Cody. Really excited for real, actual football to get started. For the last, 8 months, it's been nonstop stadium talk, relocation talk, injury talk, a lot of hatred and building a new fan base, and almost nothing about football. So excited to finally get into a little bit of the X's and O's of it.
You know, it's been way too long, and I feel like as soon as football season ends, we're stuck in this, kind of purgatory of waiting for so long just for something that's exciting. I'd probably say the most exciting thing about the offseason is the draft and some free agency moves. Other than that, we are dying for football, and we're finally back to it. So I'm excited about that. Obviously, a huge game, Monday Night Football. One thing I want to go through is obviously I want to cover some key matchups. And on the Denver side of the ball, we've got the DBs versus the prolific wide receivers that, the Los Angeles Chargers have with Philip Rivers at quarterback. And it seems like it doesn't matter who's at receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers. Philip Rivers finds a way to get guys involved. Going forward, obviously with Keenan Allen back, I'm looking at Chris Harris Jr. versus Keenan Allen. What kind of matchup do you think that's going to be, especially with Keenan Allen coming off a torn ACL?
Well, Keenan Allen likes to, he's got a nickname for himself I'm not going to remember, but it has something to do with reflecting the fact that he's uncoverable in man coverage. And normally I would be like, hey man, don't give yourself nicknames and don't give yourself nicknames that also double as trash talk, but he is actually uncoverable. His footwork is impeccable. His route running is incredible. His hands are great. He's very, very smart. Keenan Allen has, outside of the fact that he's, I guess, a tiny bit undersized, Keenan Allen only has one knock against him, and that's that he's unable to stay healthy. And throughout his career with the Chargers, part of the reason they were able to get him in the third round instead of the first round was there was injury concerns with Keenan Allen. There continues to be injury concerns with Keenan Allen. I would argue that the only reason the Chargers drafted Mike Williams in the first round of this year's draft is looking forward and knowing that eventually Keenan Allen's not going to be on the field probably for a long stretch of time. But my guess is week one, he'll probably be healthy. He always plays very, very well against the Denver Broncos, and the Broncos are going to have to focus heavily on him if they hope to slow him down. The issue, it's not just that it doesn't matter who the receivers are for Philip Rivers. The issue is that he has so many different options, and he's very smart. And when he's not playing desperate, he can avoid the turnovers. So if the Broncos focus heavily on Keenan Allen, you're going to see guys like Tyrell Williams, Antonio Gates, Hunter Henry getting open. You're going to see Melvin Gordon having more success running the ball. You're going to see Derek Watt trying to blow up guys through the middle, and you're going to see Austin Eckler and Brandon Oliver playing third down running back and getting passes thrown their way as well. Not to mention, I mean, even if you go down the wide receiver depth chart, the third wide receiver on the Chargers is Travis Benjamin, a guy who I think last year was the highest paid free agent wide receiver. So they have lots and lots and lots of options, but Keenan Allen is probably the most talented of all of them in terms of getting open and making plays. So the Broncos are going to have to dedicate more than just Chris Harris Jr. on him if they hope to keep him out of the end zone and under 100 yards receiving.
Absolutely. And when I look at the matchup between the Denver Broncos cornerbacks and obviously the Los Angeles Chargers wide receivers, we look at just the ability. I look across the NFL, and most of the teams that the Chargers play, unless they're playing Seattle, they don't really go up against guys who have defensive backs of the caliber that the Denver Broncos have. And you know, Denver's got Aqib Talib. They've got Bradley Roby and Chris Harris Jr. Obviously, Bradley Roby could be a starting corner on a lot of different NFL franchises. So I think, you know, they're going to go a little bit more of a nickel setup. However, in order for the Denver Broncos DBs to have success, in my opinion, the pass rush has to be there, you know, against Phillip Rivers. And usually Phillip Rivers, he's got one of the quickest releases in the NFL. So that makes it even more of a challenge for the Denver Broncos, you know, to get pressure on Phillip Rivers and to be able to cover, because the offense obviously is predicated with wide receivers. You know, they come out, they know the play, they know exactly where they're going to go. You got the defensive backs who are pretty much covering backwards, you know, with their back pedal and obviously in their coverage. And a lot of it is predicated off of a pass rush. And when we saw Denver Broncos defense become dominant, is because they had a great pass rush, which allowed the DBs to cover, and it made it harder for quarterbacks to throw. So, you know, I look at the AFC West now, and I look at, you know, the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers, and many people would hazard a guess to say that the AFC West has become one of the most competitive divisions in football. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of disrespect in my regard from when I look at it for the Los Angeles Chargers, because the last couple of years they've struggled, and a lot of it's mainly been due to health. Phillip Rivers has started the last couple of seasons very explosive, you know, on fire, on point, but the thing is depth on the offensive line with injuries, I think, has battered him over the last couple of years. You know, Melvin Gordon was injured a little bit on and off in the last couple of years. I thought he had a really great year last year. Going forward, what minus the storylines of moving to Los Angeles, what are you most looking forward to with the Chargers going forward this season?
Well, it's going to be the same thing every week. I mean, you were looking for key matchups. In my mind, in this game, there's 3 key matchups, and 2 of those key matchups are going to be the key to the Chargers, you know, overcoming what they've done lately, which is 9 wins in their last 32 regular season games. And actually, I think it's a little worse than that, because I think they had a losing streak heading into 2 years ago. But it's matchup number 1 is line and line. So yes, Phillip Rivers is good, and Phillip Rivers has a bevy of options. And yeah, you know, Bradley Roby is an excellent nickel cornerback, but if you play nickel, now you have a linebacker covering either Hunter Henry or Antonio Gates or both. The receiving options are there, the quarterback is there, the running back is there. What matters is whether or not this offensive line can protect Phillip Rivers. And yes, there's been injuries for the Chargers. There's injuries for every team. There's injuries for the Chargers every single year. The issue Phillip Rivers has is when you get pressure on him, he makes mistakes. When the offensive line is able to protect him throughout his career, he's an elite quarterback. So this offensive line, which has been essentially completely rebuilt, 4 new starters out of the 5 positions from last year, if you can protect Phillip Rivers, he's going to put 30 points on the board. Now, the second matchup, which is going to be an important matchup every single week for the Chargers, is the line and line the other way around. They have some weaknesses up the middle. Corey Liuget is not a very good player, but forced into being an overpaid defensive tackle for the Chargers. The linebackers are, for my money, not quite as good as some people think they are. There's no depth at secondary, or at least at cornerback. The safeties certainly have their issues, especially Jaleel Addae in coverage. But if Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram can play the way that the Chargers think they can, and the fans have seen them play, albeit somewhat inconsistently when it comes to Melvin Ingram, then the Broncos are going to struggle to get any time in the pocket for who's even starting this game for the Broncos at quarterback? Is it Trevor Siemian?
Yeah, Trevor Siemian was named the starter. I think he won at week 3 of the NFL preseason. Actually, he won at week 2 against the San Francisco 49ers. But, you know, with Paxton Lynch being out, you obviously you have Trevor Siemian. They just signed Brock Osweiler once again, you know, to back up Trevor Siemian. But right now, this is Trevor Siemian's team, so you know he's got to find a way to stay in the pocket. And obviously, if the pocket collapses, we've seen in him in the preseason something we didn't see last year, and that was the ability to scramble underneath and run and extend the play a little bit, which, I think for the offensive line on both sides for the Denver Broncos and the Chargers, obviously improved play there is going to be the most important thing. That's actually something I had on my key matchup is O-line play versus defensive pass rush, and I think that applies for both teams. There's a lot of respect for the Los Angeles Chargers defensive line and their ability to get to the quarterback, obviously with Joey Bosa. Is Joey Bosa healthy going forward heading into this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, he is. He's got a sprained finger or something that they have taped up. That's been the case all preseason long, all through training camp. It doesn't seem to be bothering him. It doesn't seem to be affecting him in any way. He uses his hands maybe better than any defensive lineman in the league, but apparently it doesn't matter that finger is not 100% because he can still use his entire hand just the way he wants it to. It's not like it's turned into a club. He just kind of has it taped to the finger next to him. So as I was saying, the three key matchups for me are basically offensive line versus defensive line on both sides of the ball, and then new coaching staff versus new coaching staff. For the Denver Broncos, and I've been saying this about the Chargers for a few weeks now. A lot of Charger fans are saying, well, there's so much talent on this team. This should be an 8 to 10 win team. Well, essentially, it's the same roster that the team had last season, but with a brand new coaching staff. You replace John Pagano as defensive coordinator with Gus Bradley. You replace Mike McCoy at head coach with Anthony Lynn, and people are assuming that those two changes right there equal an extra 3 or 4 wins throughout the season, and I'm not sure that they do. On the other side of the football, I look at the Denver Broncos, and a lot of people are still saying, well, even without a quarterback, the defense is so good that they should be a contender for the division. They should potentially be a Super Bowl contender, or at least someone that can challenge the Patriots or the Chiefs later in the year. But I opened up the Broncos coaching staff. Vance Joseph, head coach. No matter what you think of Vance Joseph, and this goes for Anthony Lynn too, you have no definitive proof that he's a good head coach. Mike McCoy, I have my thoughts about Mike McCoy. I'm sure you do too. But outside of, he was one of the guys lucky enough to be an offensive coordinator when Peyton Manning was there, you don't have a lot of proof that Mike McCoy is a good head coach. And you don't have a lot of proof that Joe Woods is a defensive coordinator on the same level as Wade Phillips. So I look at this Denver Broncos team, and I think that the scariest thing for them, and the same kind of goes for the LA Chargers, and maybe the most important matchup of this week 1 game is which head coach is ready right out of the gate to lead his team? Which offensive coordinator is ready right out of the gate? And Mike McCoy and Ken Wisnant obviously know each other very, very well. And then which defensive coordinator is going to live up to kind of the hype or the talent on the field? I mean, Joe Woods has a lot of talent on the field, but how much of that was Wade Phillips? Gus Bradley has a lot of talent on the field, and people say, oh, well, he was the architect of the Seattle Seahawks defense. Well, I'm not entirely sure that he should get a lot of credit for what happened in Seattle, because his Jacksonville defenses were terrible, and the Seattle defense has actually gotten better since he's left. So for me, this whole game is going to come down to which offensive line performs better and which kind of brand new coaching staff is ready week 1.
Well, I think that's a huge matchup, to be honest with you. And I said it all off season, when I talked about Joe Woods, Vance Joseph, they can sure, when they have their press conferences with the media, they can get you excited for, what's to come and the vision that they have. But however, it's got to translate onto the field. And with Vance Joseph, I'm looking forward to seeing how his ability as a leader, or, as players have pledged it, he's a great leader. I'm eager to see how that goes when, in a situation, let's say, where you're down by 2 scores, heading into a third quarter or at halftime. How do you respond? Are you going to come out with energy? You said Joe Woods. Many people thought that Joe Woods would be a coveted guy to go pursue a defensive coordinator job, somewhere else in the league. However, with Wade Phillips being out, they wanted to go with Joe Woods. And I begged the same question. I said, Joe Woods has a lot of talent on this defense. However, can he make the same adjustments late in the game that Wade Phillips made? I thought that was one thing that the Denver Broncos valued the most about Wade Phillips is obviously his knowledge, his experience, and his ability to adjust. When things weren't working for some reason, let's say in the second quarter or late in the game, the offense is driving down the field. He was good and quick at making adjustments that put the defense in a better position to make plays, down the stretch. With that, you lose a lot of years of leadership a lot of years of knowledge, and you go with a young guy who is passionate, energetic, former DB's coach for the Broncos before he took the promotion as the DC. My question is that, I'm absolutely looking forward to seeing, can he adjust? Can he make the adjustments quick and on the fly in a way that puts the defense in the same position to make plays as Wade Phillips did? So I'd say probably the biggest storyline for this game on both sides is obviously coaching, like you said. One guy, obviously over the last couple of weeks, the Denver Broncos released veteran safety TJ Ward, who ended up going on to sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was a guy who usually they'd shadow over a tight end. Now they got a young guy in Justin Simmons, second-year player. He's going to come in and he's going to be shadowing over Antonio Gates or Hunter Henry. That's one matchup I'm looking forward to seeing. Antonio Gates is a fountain of youth. Despite how long he's been in the NFL, his ability year in and year out to be consistent, to be that reliable third down target, red zone target as well. I think Antonio Gates has the advantage in this situation with Phillip Rivers and a young safety. So that's a matchup I'm looking forward to seeing, is how a young guy, does against an old veteran guy. Obviously with Antonio Gates, health, and his age, do you think with Hunter Henry, they're going to go more with him, first and second down situations, bring Antonio Gates in on third down? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, let's not spread lies. Antonio Gates is not a fountain of youth. If you see him running, he looks like a guy who's been in the league for almost 20 years and has taken a pounding. It looks like it hurts him to run or walk or run a route, and that's probably because it does. But Antonio Gates does one thing very, very well, and I don't know whether or not you knew this, kind of inside joke for the Chargers. Antonio Gates used to be a basketball player. Antonio Gates played basketball at Kent State, and the one thing that he has left in his bag of tricks is boxing out defenders. And the two things that he does very, very well is identify the weakness, especially in the middle of a zone defense, and box out his defender and give Phillip Rivers a tight passing lane in there. Antonio Gates is no longer going to outrun anybody. He's probably not going to fool you on a double move, and he's more than likely never going to be more than 6 or 7 yards down the field when he's in the game. Because of that, the Chargers said beginning last year when they drafted Hunter Henry that Hunter Henry was going to be in more on first and second down. Antonio Gates will be in on third down passing situations, especially like those 3rd and 5 where you can kind of go run or pass. They would have him run the 6-yard route and catch the ball right over the first down marker, and also in goal line situations. Well, what ended up happening is that Phillip Rivers and Antonio Gates still have a tremendous connection to one another, still have a great chemistry, and Antonio Gates ended up playing most of the snaps, and Hunter Henry was actually viewed as a kind of a better option in the red zone, and they ended up kind of switching positions from what everybody thought. But Gates is another year older. My guess is if he doesn't retire at the end of this year, he'll definitely retire at the end of next year. And to be completely honest with you, Antonio himself doesn't want to take the pounding of playing all those snaps. He wants to be the guy who comes in on 3rd and short, or who comes in goal line situations. So the Chargers, to begin the season, are once again saying that's the plan. Hunter Henry will be out there 1st and 10, 2nd and 10, 2nd and 8, because he's not only an option on short yardage routes, but he can run deep and he can outrun some linebackers, and he can jump up and get the ball away from some safeties, and Antonio Gates cannot. I will be interested to see how long they stick with that plan. The Chargers in past years tend to be one of those teams, and there's a lot of NFL teams like this, that have a plan to do things one way, and then they fall behind and they go back to what's comfortable. Hunter Henry being the tight end on 60 or 70% of the pass plays is not going to be comfortable for Phillip Rivers. It wasn't last year. It probably won't be this year. They're going to have to be uncomfortable for a while until they get comfortable with one another. So it's one of the things to watch in this game. At least to start, expect to see a lot of Hunter Henry, who is, like I said, a better downfield threat and, frankly, a significantly better run blocker than Antonio Gates has ever been in his entire career. So expect to see a lot of Hunter Henry early. If the Chargers somehow fall behind in this game, I wouldn't be surprised to see Gates out there almost every play.
I think, over the years with Phillip Rivers, Antonio Gates, you just look at the historic connection they've had. They've played a lot of years together. And when you watch them on the field, you can just tell they have that automatic chemistry. There could be times I've seen in the past where Antonio Gates is running a route Philip Rivers is feeling the pressure. He throws it where it needs to be before getting hit, and Antonio Gates is right there. That's something that's always been frustrating, as a Denver Broncos fan, watching those guys connect over the years and obviously score a lot of touchdowns against the Broncos. One question I want to ask you before we dive into the injury report and give our final analysis is, looking back at all the matchups that the Chargers and the Broncos have had, what game was the most memorable to you, and kind of describe, how you felt going through that?
I don't know the exact year. I wish I had the exact year. It's what Charger fans call, and Bronco fans probably call the same, the Josh McDaniels year. And that was when the Broncos, I believe, started the season 8-0 and then lost 8 consecutive games and missed the playoffs, and the Chargers got in instead. I believe the Chargers actually got in with an 8-8 record, and there was a whole thing where they got in, I think, instead of the New England Patriots somehow, because I believe they won the division at 8-8 and the Patriots had 10 wins or something. Also the Matt Castle year, if memory serves. And the last game of that season was a win or go home game. It essentially was a playoff game. The Broncos had lost 7 straight. The Chargers, with Norv Turner at the helm, were riding high. They were on one of their November, December winning streaks. And if the Chargers could win that game, they were going to the playoffs. If the Broncos could win that game, they were going to the playoffs. I think it was a game for the division. And I actually, at the time, was living on the East Coast, and it was such an important game. I mean, it essentially was a playoff game against, at the time, what was the Chargers' biggest rival, because the Raiders were nothing. And I flew out to watch that game with my friends and my family in San Diego. I believe the Chargers put a hefty beatdown on the Denver Broncos. I'm going to say Jay Cutler and the Denver Broncos.
Jay Cutler, Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, it was a celebratory moment for Charger fans. Not the closest game, not the most exciting game. I also have bad memories, like when the Chargers went up super duper early against Peyton Manning. I think his first game with the Broncos against the Chargers, and he came all the way back, I think, from 4 touchdowns down to win against the Chargers on Sunday night or Monday Night Football. So there's bad memories in there too. So I tend to go towards the good ones, and I remember that game just being finally in a big spot when the Chargers needed to come through. They came out and played their best football at the right time.
I do remember that game very vividly. It was a Sunday Night Football matchup. I was so excited. I was probably a sophomore in high school at the time, and you know what? I had my hopes up. That's when we had Jay Cutler, Brandon Marshall, and you had Champ Bailey on defense, and obviously your guys' return game was, it was insane. You guys had Darren Sproles back there at the time. I remember over the years, especially, in the 2008s, 2009s, you guys, the San Diego Chargers, they were on a roll. They were on an absolute tear. They had LaDainian Tomlinson still in his final years as a Charger, as well as Darren Sproles in the return game. And, there were some classic, back and forth battles between these two teams. And I'd say my most memorable memory would have to be the one that you were described a little earlier with the Monday Night Football game, being down 24-0 at halftime, Peyton Manning coming back, and the Broncos offense just executing, and obviously he hit Demaryius Thomas on a double post move. And that's when the comeback started. And then obviously Tony Carter with the fumble recovery. And then obviously Chris Harris Jr. late in the game. That's when we started to find out who Chris Harris Jr. really was when Philip Rivers, they were running the 2-minute offense. And he threw the ball, and Chris Harris Jr. jumped it for the pick six. That was a memorable game, in my opinion. And I think this rivalry doesn't get enough respect that it usually does. When people talk about AFC West rivalries, they usually look at the Broncos and the Raiders. But I think the most important one is obviously the Chargers and the Broncos, because these are the top two teams who've really been the top of the division over the last 10 to 12 years. Has been these two teams right here. And obviously the Oakland Raiders have been on the rise, and the Chiefs are absolutely on the rise as well. And they've been on a tear the last couple of years. I do believe that this is the most competitive division in the NFL, but the national media is starting to acknowledge it as well, which is a great thing going forward. But the one thing I'm really looking forward to in this matchup is just seeing how these new coaches take the field and how the team responds to them. Big stage, obviously an 8:15 p.m. kickoff here in the next couple minutes, on Monday Night Football. I'm very excited about that. Before we dive into, your final pregame analysis, I'll get mine after you. But what's the injury report for the Los Angeles Chargers looking like right now?
It looks good at the moment. Mike Williams, first-round draft pick, who didn't participate in training camp with a back injury and didn't participate in any preseason games with a back injury, appears to be healthy, but he's going to be out because they don't have him practicing just yet. They're getting him physically up to speed before they insert him at practice. So because he hasn't practiced, he's not going to be out there. Jeremiah Atauchu, who's a backup defensive end and a third-round pick from about 3 years ago, is questionable but my guess is he'll get in there and play his handful of snaps. Dontrell Inman, who is the team's 4th or 5th wide receiver on the depth chart, is questionable. My guess is he'll be there on the sidelines in uniform, active, ready to go should anyone get injured, but otherwise probably won't be on the field. Sean McGrath is the team's either 3rd or 4th tight end. He's questionable. Don't expect to see him unless there's an injury to the tight ends. And Trey Boston, who's actually the team's new starting free safety. They signed him away from Carolina, and he won the job over Dwight Lowry, who the team tried to replace Eric Weddle with last year unsuccessfully. He has a calf issue, but he participated fully in all the practices except for Saturdays. So I wouldn't expect him to miss his first start with the LA Chargers. Really, these are guys outside of Trey Boston. These are guys that probably weren't going to factor into this game no matter what. So it's not a big deal. And I expect Trey Boston to play.
On the Denver injury front, we have Derek Wolfe, who sprained his ankle, obviously, in training camp, and a lot of people thought it was going to be a significant injury at first, ended up being a severe high ankle sprain. He was limited one day of practice this week, and then he's a full participant. He's expected to go. Everybody that's on the injury report for the Broncos is going to play, minus the fact that Shane Ray, who's on injured reserve till probably about midway through the season. The Broncos get Shaq Barrett back on the edge, which is going to help take the pressure off Von Miller. However, I worry about the depth there. Obviously going forward, without Shane Ray there, you got Shaq Barrett, who's just coming off a hip injury, and as we all know, hip injuries tend to linger for players, especially in a game where you're constantly cutting or turning. I'm eager to see how Shaq Barrett holds up. The two guys that are going to be out for the Denver Broncos is Jared Crick, who got injured. He had a lot of back issues, obviously, in the preseason. He's going to be out, and as well as Zach Kerr, who got rolled up on in the game against the San Francisco 49ers with a knee injury. He's out. The Denver Broncos just released Kyle Peko, Domata Peko's cousin, just this past couple days, and they're going to make a roster move soon. I anticipate they're going to promote Tyreek Jarrett, big nose tackle, to the active squad before Monday night, and I expect to see him to play, obviously, alongside with Shelby Harris as well. So, really, the Denver Broncos injury report is really, they look at the defensive line is where they're battered the most, and that's been the most questionable thing for the Denver Broncos, is looking at the defense and the history of how it's been the last couple of years, and they really struggled last year to stop the run. So what they're going to be doing going forward is obviously bringing in these guys like Tyreek Jarrett and obviously Shelby Harris. Zach Kerr was a guy who they really had a lot of high hopes for, but right now with him being injured, he's going to be out for, I'd anticipate probably a couple more weeks, and then they'll get Shane Ray back probably week 7 or week 8 of the regular season. He had off-season, wrist surgery. He hurt it in training camp, so he's going to be out. The key is obviously health, and as we talked about it, when you look at the Denver Broncos offensive line, there's a lot of question marks, especially at left guard. Right now they're in a competition between Max Garcia and Alan Barber, who they traded for out of Philadelphia, and then you have Jamal Charles at running back, CJ Anderson, who, both these guys have had an injury history. I'd anticipate to see a little bit of D'Angelo Henderson. He's a speedy rookie out of Coastal Carolina, and we've seen a lot from him out of the preseason. He's explosive. He has the ability to run people over, and he's just a dynamic wild card. But other than that, the Denver Broncos are going to be without Carlos Henderson for the rest of the year as well. Out of La Tech, he was a speedy returner. Obviously, he was in a competition for the number 3 spot at wide receiver. Denver Broncos this year, obviously, with Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, Virgil Green. You got Jeff Hireman. You got and obviously Jake Butt will be activated probably midway through the season. You got AJ Derby at tight end. They have offensive weapons, but the question is, can they all stay on the field? Can they stay healthy? And that's a big thing that I got. As one of my keys to the game for the Denver Broncos is stay healthy and stay true to what you're doing. Before we dive into the final part of this thing, what is your final analysis and how do you predict this game may go based on what you've seen in the preseason for the Los Angeles Chargers?
Well, I've said throughout this preseason that I think if the Chargers are completely healthy, they're a 10, 11, maybe 12-win team. But as the year goes along and they lose guys, that win total is going to drop off. When Mike Williams got injured, I said, well, there goes 1 or 2 wins. When Denzel Perriman got injured, he's not expected back for this game. There goes a couple of more wins, potentially, although his backup is a good one. Should Jason Verrett or Casey Hayward end up getting injured, there's a lot of wins. Should there be any more injuries along the offensive line, specifically at the tackle spots, there goes a lot of wins. Right now, knowing that the Chargers are probably as healthy as they're going to be all year long, I expect this to be a pretty good, easy might be the wrong word because it's a divisional matchup, but I expect this to be the type of game that the Chargers want to play. They have the cornerbacks to match up with the Broncos' offensive weapons. They have the pass pass rush that could potentially give Trevor Siemian some problems. Keenan Allen is still out there. Melvin Gordon is probably going to get off to a pretty quick start if history is any factor here. So I expect this to be one of the better games the Chargers play all year, but should there be any injuries in the first half, obviously that's going to change their game plan. Right now, they match up very, very well with the Broncos because the defense is built to stop the pass, not to stop the run. I'm sorry if this is offensive. I don't respect the Broncos running game right now. I don't respect their offensive line to create lanes. I don't respect C.J. Anderson or Jamal Charles to do anything special at this point in Jamal's career, or I've just really never seen anything from C.J. Anderson that makes me think he's an elite level running back. So I think all of the pressure is going to be on Trevor Siemian and the Broncos passing attack to try and put up 25, 30, 35 points and keep up with what looks like a high-powered Chargers offense right now. And I don't think that they're going to be able to do it with Jason Verrett, Casey Hayward out there healthy, with Melvin Ingram, Joey Bosa out there healthy. I think this is a game where you see a lot of passing, and that puts the advantage squarely on the LA Chargers.
You know, I definitely respect your angle on that, but one thing I'm really looking forward to, and I think it is going to be improved, if the Denver Broncos can come out and establish their run game early, which in history they haven't really done a good job of that in the last 2 seasons. I have a little bit more confidence this year, not the zone blocking scheme that you witnessed with Gary Kubiak, but with obviously the new system and Mike McCoy. We've seen Mike McCoy predicate a lot of different weapons, and obviously I think an X factor, even though they don't really primarily use a fullback, is Andy Yanovich, who's going to help get the run game going. I expect maybe even see some double tight stuff coming out, obviously out of the shotgun as well. If the Denver Broncos want to have a chance to win this game, in my opinion, they have to come out and they have to stop the run. Like you said, Melvin Gordon's gotten off to a hot start against the Broncos in the past. They can't allow that to happen this time, so they got to plug the middle, keep contained on the outside, where Melvin Gordon is really predicatedly, he's dominated the Broncos on the outside of the edge, and that's where our DNs have struggled in the past with keeping contained against a guy of his stature. And Keenan Allen's a very underrated blocking wide receiver, in my opinion. I think he's one of the best blocking wideouts, in the National Football League. My question is, can he stay healthy? Obviously, coming off an ACL injury, I've done that before. It's a mental journey, and being back out there on a game speed, obviously cutting and doing all the things you can, you got to hope he can stay and remain healthy.
I thought it was going to be a passing game, and that gives the advantage to the Chargers. I've seen Von Miller take over games. Specifically, if he plays the way in this game that he played in the Super Bowl a few years back when the Broncos won it, where he just shuts down his side of the field for the run and gets consistent pressure and 2, 3, maybe 4 sacks. I mean, he's going to be going up against Russell Okung for most of this game, someone who he's very familiar with because he was a member of the Broncos last year. If he can just beat up on Russell Okung all game long, then this one's going to be difficult because the Broncos defense will end up scoring points. Not necessarily catching interceptions and running them back for touchdowns, but creating turnovers either through interceptions or fumbles that lead to points for the Broncos offense with short fields and what have you. If Von Miller can play the, perfect game that we've seen him play in the past, then this one's going to be tough for the Chargers.
Speaking of Russell Okung, obviously, last year when the Denver Broncos played the Chargers on Thursday Night Football, the Color Rush game, Russell Okung had multiple holding penalties. How has he looked for you guys in the preseason before we get off air?
He's looked fine. I mean, the Chargers' offensive line has been totally rebuilt and revamped, but I don't know that it's all that improved over what they had last year. They finally cut former Bronco Orlando Franklin, who's just a train wreck from the moment that the Chargers signed him. Russell Okung is replacing King Dunlap, who has always been good but injury prone, specifically concussion prone. And I don't think Okung is really a step up or step down from Dunlap, except for the fact that he doesn't have the same kind of concussion issues right now. So there's a better chance of him playing all 16 games. Forrest Lamp, who is the Chargers' second-round pick, a lot of people thought potentially the best offensive lineman in this entire draft, was expected to be the starting right guard to start the season, is starting the season on injured reserve and won't be back this year. They didn't really find a solution at center, which they've been looking for a couple of years now. So you have Spencer Pulley there, who's a big weakness. The entire offensive line has been rebuilt, but the Chargers' offensive line last year was bad, and I don't necessarily believe that this offensive line is anything better than bad this year until I see it.
Football's back. We're excited about it. Obviously, just moments away from kickoff. We hope that you enjoyed listening here on the Locked On Podcast Network to Locked On Broncos and Locked On Chargers, breaking down the game, giving their thoughts, analysis, and obviously key matchups as well. John Gennaro joins me with Locked On Chargers as well. So, John, thank you so much for joining. Obviously, we'll talk about it more after the game. I'll tweet you from the Locked On Broncos account. Looking forward to the matchup, and obviously wishing you and your team a healthy and happy season this year.
Thanks, bud. Same to you.